Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today's one you guys have all been asking for, the new album from U2, titled Songs of Innocence. On September 9th of this year, Apple unveiled its newest tech lineup, which included the newest iterations of the iPhone and the Apple Watch, the newest gimmick to try to replace the common wristwatch, which doesn't work because most people don't wear watches anymore, and will likely fall into the same problem unless Apple fetishists choose to embrace it and snap it up. But that wasn't the only thing revealed at that press conference, because rock band U2 announced that their newest album, Songs of Innocence, would be arriving in your iTunes that very day for free should you choose to pull it off the iCloud. And consumers revolted. Suddenly the big story wasn't the iPhone or really the Apple Watch, but the backlash leveled against U2 for not only allying with Apple, which they've done extensively in the past to mixed results, but that U2 had suddenly injected their newest album into everybody's iTunes library whether they wanted it or not. And the response was emphatic. People did not want this album, to the point where Apple released a tool specifically designed for iTunes users who don't know how to get to the music folder to get rid of the album instead of just waiting for the free iCloud download window to expire. And honestly, I was a little bit shocked at this reaction. I mean, it's free music from one of the biggest rock bands on earth who hadn't dropped an album in 5 years, and honestly, they don't have that bad of a critical reputation. So why the huge backlash here? Well, I suspect that part of it is that people tend to be fairly protective of what they put in their iTunes libraries. Lord knows I am. But the larger truth is that many people tend to have fairly complicated feelings regarding U2. I know I do. I mean, they started as one of the most potent and explosive mainstream rock acts of the 1980s, known for earnest, explosive power, sweeping scope, and socially minded lyrics that really connected with people until Rattle and Hum exposed the mind-boggling pretentiousness and swaggering rock star arrogance beneath it all that made the band come across as more than a little bit preachy and kind of insufferable. So without warning, the band realized that, pulled a 180, and went straight for the self-aware shields of irony with Achtung Baby, throwing earnestness completely out the window for a highly artificial image of cool that paid diminishing returns as the 1990s wore on and U2 drifted more towards electronic music. Now this experimentation eventually ended in the flashy and intentionally empty feeling record Pop, the mixed reception of which pushed U2 back towards the earnest, politically minded anthems that made their fortune in the 1980s. Unfortunately, the shift took a while to really stick the landing, mostly because the instrumentation lacked a lot of real visceral punch and Bono's lyrics had taken a turn for the self-indulgent, more than usual. And while they would fix some of the form in the instrumentation, it was plainly apparent that U2 was never going back to the explosive power of War anytime soon, which is probably my favorite U2 album outside of the Joshua Tree, which is just a classic. But they got some of the power back, which was good. The lyrics remained really spotty across 2004's How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb and 2009's even more scattershot No Line in the Horizon. And considering that the opening buzz for this album from the music press was that it was going to be produced by Ryan Tedder, Paul Epworth, and Brian Burton, aka Danger Mouse, the last whose work has taken something of a real downturn this year on the new albums from Broken Bells and the Black Keys, I was not looking forward to this album, not really. But hey, U2 they're one of the greatest rock bands of all time, and I'm a big fan of U2, so maybe they'd pull something together, right? Honestly, they did not pull that much together. For an album that U2 has called one of their most personal, Songs of Innocence is a record that feels stifled in vague platitudes, insubstantial production, and real instrumental misfires. Or let me put it this way, it's a damn good thing that U2 is as talented as they are at maintaining a firm foundation of guitar-driven rock music, because in the hands of a lesser band, an album this disjointed and this shaky would have been the death knell. In other words, Songs of Innocence, it's not a bad record, but I'd hesitate to call it more than decent at best. So okay, let's start by talking about what I really do like about this album, most of which comes through in the instrumentation, and the majority of it comes courtesy of The Edge and Adam Clayton on bass. In an extremely welcome instrumental shift, somebody finally decided that it was okay for guitar tones to have some real grime and texture again, from the shimmering tones that dominated their last 3 albums and honestly got a little bit tedious. And U2 finally take as much advantage of it as they possibly can. As much as I didn't really think the thick fuzz worked against the rest of the production of the opening single, The Miracle of Joey Joey Ramone, it did add some real visceral texture to a pretty slick and generally unimpressive indie folk-inspired track with the backing chorus and all the hand claps that, honestly, Joey Ramone probably would have laughed at. And near the stronger back half of this album, the texture really comes back in earnest. The menacing crunch of the bass against the spiky heaviness of the guitar on Volcano, which features the Edge doing what he does best, the prominent guitar leads on Raised by Wolves, the pretty solid guitar melodies of This Is Where You Can Find Me Now, cutting through the oily film of Danger Mouse's keyboards, and of course, the grimy and pretty damn kick-ass Cedarwood Road that stands out as one of the heaviest and darkest songs that U2 has written in recent years, and I really liked it. Hell, the Edge's guitar solo is pretty much the only redeeming element of Sleep Like a Baby that features some of Bono's worst ever falsetto. Now, sure, none of it is anywhere near as visceral as U2's early work, but you know, I don't entirely blame the band for that. They're not going back to that sound. Hell, I honestly don't even blame Bono for any of it, because, I mean, honestly, he sounds like he gives more of a damn about this album, and he delivers a pretty solid performance behind the microphone, devoid of some of that ironic disaffection that I have never, ever liked about some of his post-Achtung Baby work. No, the problem you're looking at comes down to production. And look, some of you are gonna say that it's unfair to compare Danger Mouse, Paul Epworth, and Ryan Tedder to some of the legendary producers that U2 have worked with in the past. But look, I can't deny what worked, and the production is one of the biggest weaknesses on this record. Ryan Tedder probably fares the best. His sweeping grandeur, it's a natural fit for U2, and while I do think he's a little bit too slick and percussion heavy, he's not really that much of a problem on this album. Well, okay, except for Iris Hold Me Close, which feels swallowed up in way too much reverb, but at least manages to give some of the guitars a little bit of presence, and I can appreciate that. Hey, it's Ryan Tedder, you get what you asked for. But Brian Burton, look, I don't know what the hell has happened to Danger Mouse this year. He, who used to be a producer I respected and liked a lot, but his recognizable contributions on this album do not work at all. At best, his keyboard tones feel tacked on, and the vocal production for Bono is only a little bit exaggerated, which kind of fits given Bono's delivery and personality. California, There Is No End to Love, it's one of the better examples. It's got a pretty solid guitar line and spacious punch, and U2 gets washed out California Dreams pretty well for an Irish band, but across the entire mix, the inert synthesizer tone feels slathered on, burying the guitars or any sort of punch. Raised by Wolves has the same problem, suffers by having the steady chug of the guitars behind these breathy vocal interjections and a chorus that shoves the drums to the front of even Bono and completely loses any sort of impact on the chorus. The worst song of all comes on Sleep Like a Baby, which features these stiff and inert synth leads and Bono sounding like he's singing through an auto-tuned tube full of water, which might be the worst possible production for his voice, especially in his falsetto range, or on This Is Where You Can Reach Me Now, which features these incredibly thin organ lines that completely undercut the real heft and weight of the song that has those rich choral multi-tracking. Yeah, okay, I like the strings arrangements, and the fact that Brian Burton knows enough to bring the guitar texture forward is good, but he uses the guitars as punctuation instead of as the melody to drive the song. And letting the Edge play through a haze of reverb at the back of the mix on Sleep Like a Baby on his guitar solo, no less, strikes me as the complete misuse of a really great, really iconic guitarist. But you know what? Now we have to talk about lyrics and themes, and let's get the obvious problem out of the way. If U2 were trying to go for a more personal sounding album, picking every producer in the mainstream book besides Greg Kurstin, known for drowning their mixes in reverb and sucking away visceral punch at every single term, look, that was the wrong choice from the get-go. And I won't lie and say that U2's choice to not go back to the visceral punch of their early days instrumentally, which apparently provided more of the influence for this record lyrically, was not a disappointment for me, because honestly it is. But you know what? There are points where U2 get some of that youthful disaffection that they get it pretty well that comes from Innocence Lost. The chugging, fist-pumping populism of Volcano that makes you just feel alive, the disaffection of Raised by Wolves, hell, I even like the political edge of This Is Where You Can Reach Me Now. And Cedarwood Road kicks all amounts of ass because it feels immediate and specific and real in its lyrics. If only the rest of this album were like that. U2 has run into problems before and relying on platitudes and common iconography. Normally religious, which of course crops up here on the Troubles, but it's mostly not that bad, instead of detailed stories that contain that real potent human element to pull you in beyond the distance that the band separates you from. And let me stress, that human element is essential. Sure, the heady rush of rock star grandeur and escapism is potent, but without that foundation, it's all so empty. And that's the feel I get for a good half of this album. Because let's be honest, as much as I get the heartfelt tribute to Joey Ramone and that youthful connection that Bono clearly has to his work, he could have written that song about any dead punk rocker with fuzz-heavy guitars because there's barely any detail to it to tie it back to the Ramones. And the exasperating part of this album is that this keeps happening. Iris, Hold Me Close. It's a song where Bono wrote about his dead mother, and while there is some sparse maternal imagery, if I hadn't known about this family connection from an outside source, I just assumed that Iris is just some other girl. The song doesn't really stand on its own lyrically without outside knowledge to inform it, and good art needs to be able to stand on its own. Song for Someone is another example, which starts out with the incredibly unflattering line, "You've got a face not spoiled by beauty," and then proceeds to get maddeningly vague with the chorus that this is an uplifting song for someone. And look, U2 has used broad platitudes in the past to reach a broader audience. I get that. But when you've written songs like One and Beautiful Day, and then you come up with something this thin and insubstantial, I'm sorry, you don't get a pass from me here. But the absolute worst song on this album, however, is Every Breaking Wave. A song that on the surface seems to be a resignation that you can't fight the wave, gamblers go in knowing that they'll end up losing, and we all just need to be able to accept it all. First thing, what in the nine hells is U2 writing a song like this for? For a band known for their uplifting anthems, this is one of the biggest surrenders that I've ever heard them put on record. But you know what? I'm not going to deny it fits thematically, because when you think about it, this really isn't an album about songs of innocence, but innocence lost. Icons die. California revels in its hollowness. You get swallowed up by the machine and become cynical. And to quote the last song, The Troubles, directly, someone stepped inside your soul. Little by little, they robbed and stole, till someone else was in control. And that song tries in the third verse to show Bono showing that he's finally cast aside all that pain, all that personal disaffection aside, and that he's moved on to something better. But when the song is played like a dirge with Licky Lee on the hook, and Bono's lyric in that third verse, God knows it's not easy taking on the shape of someone else's pain, it loses that personal connection for me. Bono, I have to ask, what about your pain? For an album that speaks about innocence lost, supposed to be personal, it rings incredibly hollow because it feels like U2 is trying to mimic that existential crisis rather than live it for themselves. And if anything, that's the real heartbreaking part of this album. Look, I don't hate or even dislike Songs of Innocence. U2 is still a good enough rock band, and there are enough solid moments on this record to really save it. I will say that. But it's definitely a weaker album in their discography, and it's a very worrying sign that U2 is trying to recapture old moments and memories rather than live new ones. And for a record that's supposed to feel really personal and intimate, thanks to the production, it feels very nearly the opposite. I'm feeling a very light 6 out of 10, and only recommendation if you're a hardcore U2 fan like I am. But even still, most of you will have probably already deleted this from your iTunes. And while I won't do the same, I completely understand why you do. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Can't imagine this review is going to bring up any sort of controversy. Just try to keep it modestly civil in the comments. If there's anything else I may be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.